With the upcoming release of Resident Evil Village just a week away, fans are eagerly awaiting their chance to jump into the shoes of Ethan once more for this next-generation entry in the series. After barely managing to escape the clutches of the Baker family and their bioweapon-infested estate in Resident Evil 7, Ethan travels to Romania, both to save his newborn daughter Rose and to seek answers as to why his family is being targeted by Mother Miranda's shadowy organization. With a colorful cast of diabolical antagonists raising hell at every turn, Village is shaping up to be another spooky and exhilarating foray into the world of survival horror. With this in mind, here are 8 essential features that should be included in the final game.
Ethan Winters, welcome.
Any self-respecting Resident Evil fan will tell you that in-game puzzles are one of the defining features of a Resident Evil game. Each game in the franchise has had its own unique assortment of puzzles that not only work the player's mind, but also force the player to directly interact with the game's gritty environments. Whether it's a piano that unlocks a hidden room in the Spencer Mansion, or the various medallions and keys that unlock doors in the Raccoon City Police Department, every environment the player comes across possesses a different puzzle that blends in cohesively with its setting. Resident Evil 7 represented a return to form with puzzles that harkened back to the ones found in the original Spencer Mansion, pleasing a lot of longtime fans and giving us hope for Resident Evil Village. With the recent gameplay showcases and demos highlighting the existence of plenty of puzzles to keep us busy, we're looking forward to bashing our heads against the wall once more as we try to solve these time-honored tests of trial and error.
They're coming. Who is?
The Resident Evil franchise is famous for having some of the most terrifying and nightmare-inducing boss encounters ever conceived in the video game industry, from the cat-and-mouse nature of run-ins with Mr. X, Nemesis, and Jack Baker, to the daunting face-offs against their final, gigantic transformations. Each of these boss fights were unique in their own right, often pushing players to think outside the box in order to take down these larger-than-life abominations. We're hoping that Resident Evil Village not only continues this tradition, but also provides its own innovations to boss fights that will be the highlights of the game. One concept we hope gets explored and implemented is boss enemies using hallucinations and more supernatural forces to wreak havoc upon the player character. From what we've seen so far, in various trailers and gameplay presentations, Resident Evil Village's tougher enemies will be quite distinct from those found in previous games in their use of otherworldly powers to attack the player, providing something akin to the prototype Hookman build in Resident Evil 4. Since most of the crazy occurrences in each game can be traced back to a deadly pathogen created by Umbrella or another rogue organization, it would be interesting to see how Capcom would ground these sorts of encounters in scientific realism. Whatever it is that's turning people into werewolves, vampires, and witch-like humanoids will inevitably be revealed, as has always been the case in every Resident Evil game. But nevertheless, the fact that Capcom is going all in with incorporating these classical aspects of Romanian folklore into the broader narrative of bioterrorism makes it clear that Resident Evil Village will have unforgettable boss encounters that will likely blur the line between the natural and the supernatural.
Chris? Sorry, Ethan. Why?
When it was revealed that Chris would be returning for this iteration of the mainline series, fans reacted with both excitement and worry. While everyone breathed a sigh of relief when it was revealed that Capcom had reverted to using Chris's bulky build from his boulder punching days, fans remained concerned about what Chris's new, darker role in Village might mean for the narrative as a whole. In particular, the opening text found in the first teaser trailer for the game, which reads, "His story comes to a close," has fans worried that this may signal the permanent end of Chris's involvement in the overarching story moving forward. While it hasn't been confirmed whether this text is referring to Chris or Ethan, it's safe to say Chris is heading down a path that will permanently change his destiny. While we may speculate what will become of Chris, we can only hope that Capcom does our favorite boulder-punching tank of a protagonist justice, and even if it does turn out to be Chris's final foray into the world of survival horror, let's hope that at least he goes out with a final bang.
You killed Mia. Now do me and finish the job.
Resident Evil games are renowned for the environmental storytelling, spectacularly detailed backdrops, and pieces of lore carefully placed throughout their dilapidated domains. Ever since the first game in the franchise, the Resident Evil experience has largely centered around interacting with objects, documents, and characters within the world in order to uncover the shocking revelations that shape its overarching narrative. Every nook and cranny of the Spencer Mansion, the Raccoon City Police Department, and the Los Iluminados Castle have a story to tell with the bits left behind by the previous inhabitants. From reports detailing the gruesome outcomes of experiments gone awry, to bloody letters from victims undergoing horrific transformations, uncovering the goings-on of each location through the lore is just as engrossing as shooting through hordes of zombies or immolating horrific BOWs. Considering that Resident Evil Village is set in a remote Romanian settlement with a castle at its center, there will certainly be a lot to see, hear, and feel as we explore this gothic environment. Adding the fact that the game seems to be taking cues from Romanian folklore and alluding to Umbrella's ties to the region, it's safe to say the next-gen game world will not only look beautiful, but will also beautifully convey the history and circumstances surrounding the horrifying events within it. We may have unpleasant interactions with the cultish inhabitants of the village, but at least there'll be plenty to look at along the way.
Take it! Take it!
No Resident Evil game would be complete without an arsenal of weapons designed to take down even the deadliest of BOWs. From handguns to rocket launchers, these staples of survival have gone hand in hand with the evolution of the survival horror genre. Similarly, the scarcity of bullets available and resulting limitations on firearm use have also gone hand in hand with Resident Evil. The rush of adrenaline the player feels when they have just enough bullets to take down a zombie or a tough boss is exactly the type of excitement you can expect from a Resident Evil game, and having an assortment of different weapons and ammo types available makes the experience that much more exciting. Resident Evil 4 was able to perfectly achieve this kind of thrill by introducing a merchant side character in the game whose assortment of different weapons and corresponding upgrades helped keep combat fresh throughout the duration of the game. One would think that giving the player access to an entire stock of different handguns, shotguns, rifles, and attachments for said weapons would make for an overpowered protagonist, especially in a survival horror game. However, the limited ammunition, as well as the different weak spots in enemies corresponding to different ammo types, ensured that players still felt almost powerless in the face of an unrelenting horde of zombies or an agile BOW. This sense of choice is something that was severely lacking in Resident Evil 7, as players only had one of each weapon type available. Giving the player access to different weapons within each class, albeit requiring considerable sums of in-game currency to acquire, would make combat considerably more dynamic and let players truly define their playstyle. While we hope Capcom doesn't take it too far in arming players to the teeth, giving players more choices in weaponry would go a long way towards adding a strategic component to combat and gameplay. Plus, it would give the game that much more replayability for players looking to spice up their second or third playthroughs. The most recent gameplay showcase for Resident Evil 8 offered a glimpse into how the merchant system works, and it appears that Capcom is updating it to fit the series' new direction. With this in mind, it's safe to say that Capcom is giving the game's merchant the same level of attention previously enjoyed in Resident Evil 4. Here's hoping he provides us with candor and comic relief as we take on the Lycan hordes of the village.
What are you buying? Just something an old friend of mine used to say.
It wouldn't be a true Resident Evil game without the involvement of Umbrella in some way, and thankfully, the latest glimpses of the new title seem to indicate that the iconic pharmaceutical conglomerate will be returning. While Umbrella's presence within the most recent games has mostly been relegated to subtle hints about their re-emergence, the clear use of Umbrella motifs and insignias in and around Castle Dimitrescu seem to indicate that the new snowy Gothic setting has some kind of historical connection to the organization. Taking the company's European origins into account, players may well be uncovering the hidden roots of Umbrella amid the Romanian backdrop of this new adventure. In a way, it makes perfect sense that Capcom would take this approach both with the story and the setting, as it provides the perfect opportunity to put the franchise's classical antagonistic force back into the spotlight. It will be interesting to see what dark, ancient secrets we'll be uncovering once we're able to enter the survival horror of the village. That is, if we're able to avoid being skewered by the tyrant-like matriarch, Lady Dimitrescu.
Stupid man thing! You won't live long, even if you run!
thank you for waiting. And now let the games begin!
In recent years, the Resident Evil series has benefited from a much-needed glow-up thanks in large part to full-on remakes, complete with faithful recreations of Raccoon City and refined gameplay mechanics that completely streamline the combat experience. Although the remakes of both Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 were met with critical acclaim and fanfare, one flaw permeating through both of these titles is the surprisingly short length of each game's respective campaign. Don't get us wrong, while we definitely enjoyed our foray into these graphically impressive and immersive reimaginings, we can't help but feel that each experience was a little too short. This is especially true for Resident Evil 3, which was a game that had so much cut content that players could practically finish it in one sitting. While the OG Resident Evil 3 was similar in its short length, the RE3 remake provided an opportunity to build on the original and expand Raccoon City into a more explorable open-world environment. Putting aside our disappointment with what could have been in Resident Evil 3, we sincerely hope that Resident Evil Village offers a girthier and more fleshed-out campaign experience. With what's been shown so far, it's clearly evident that the expansive village and castle backdrops will at least provide a significantly bigger area to explore, with a layout that harkens back to Resident Evil 4's epic journey through occult communities and gothic estates. Combining this with the same sort of progression found in Resident Evil 7 would definitely provide for an experience that feels both lengthy and impactful, and we sincerely hope that will be the case when we finally get our hands on the game.
Ethan Winters.
Mr. Winter.
Poor Ethan.
In the franchise's soft reboot, Resident Evil 7, fans were able to step into the shoes of Ethan Winters, experiencing the game through a new and improved first-person perspective. Two previous Resident Evil titles, Resident Evil Survivor and Resident Evil Dead Aim, had experimented with this change in perspective, and while the light gun-esque gameplay proved to be cumbersome and gimmicky, both titles provided interesting protagonists with clear motives and a real stake in the overarching narrative of the series. In contrast, Ethan Winters isn't particularly fleshed out or developed. Aside from being the spouse of Mia Winters and being tormented at the hands of Evelyn and the Baker family, Ethan doesn't really have a lot going for him regarding connection to the previous characters or storylines. Perhaps it's intentional on the part of Capcom to have him serve as a relatable self-insert character, but it would be remiss not to address just how generic Ethan is for a Resident Evil character. Considering his tense re-encounter with Chris Redfield and the circumstances surrounding the brutal death of his wife, we expect Ethan to develop into a proper Resident Evil protagonist as he makes his way through the village in search of his abducted daughter. As someone who has survived horrific encounters with humanoid bioweapons similar to those in the Spencer Mansion, and considering the parallels to Resident Evil 4's plot progression, it's probably safe to say that Capcom is setting Ethan up as someone with a clear stake in the core conflict of the franchise. Let's hope that Ethan's new foray into the village will show him grow to be a key player in this new chapter of the Resident Evil saga.
Where's Rose? Who's Mother Miranda?
The bell tolls for us all. They're coming again!
Rose is here?
Well, that about covers it for the 8 things we want to see in Resident Evil Village. What are the things you are looking forward to seeing in the new Resident Evil game? Let us know in the comments, like, subscribe, and ring the bell to see more videos like this one from Dank Swank. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time on the classiest cavern on the World Wide Web.